Goodness, that's all slow. And I'm just going to ignore that low frames per second rate because I still don't know why it's doing it to me. Anyway, hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may happen to be in the world. This is Tad. I'm going to be reading, um, which is basically all I'm qualified to do since I never finished school and I can't be trusted around animals, moving things, machinery, you name it. Not fit for much of anything except writing books and reading books and stuff like that. So that's why I'm here. That's what I'm doing. And I hope you're all having a good week since I saw you last. And what's been going on with us? Just the usual. We're still all in mid work. We are kind of still in lockdown, mostly just because there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of reason to push our luck. As I've mentioned in the past, one of our kids does have a health issue, and as a result, we're maybe a little more cautious than some people about COVID and things like that. But also, just I'm in the midst of absolute deadline madness and trying to finish two books at the same time. So that's keeping me pretty busy. And Deborah is very, very busy, very, very busy with her various fabric related occupations. That's not as easy to say as you might think it was. Deborah is very busy with her various fabric related occupations. Yeah, okay. So she's working hard. I'm working hard. The kids are, well, I'd like to think they're all working hard, but God only knows. Most of them are doing college of some kind. So anyway, and the dogs are crazy. The cat is sleeping. And the snake is fine as far as I know. I haven't seen the snake for a couple of weeks because she lives in a tank in our daughter's room. So trying to get in there is kind of, it's like trying to cross no man's land during the First World War. It's just not worth the trouble. So that's really all that's going on here. I'm trying to think of anything interesting. We've made a sudden shift here into autumnal weather, but because it's California, one of the things that goes with autumnal weather is very warm days. I have always said that October, if you're going to schedule something for an outdoor daytime activity, like a wedding or something like that, in California, then your best bet is often in October because the days are usually gorgeous, quite warm. It's been getting up to, about 90 degrees here. And then it cools off very quickly in the evening, especially where we live because the marine layer comes in from the ocean over the hills in which we are situated and just pushes the temperatures right down again and very quickly. So between the hour, between the hour before sunset and the hour after sunset, there's, like a 20-degree or more shift in temperature, sometimes a good bit more than that. So, but it's very nice during the day. So we've been enjoying that. The squirrels and the rabbits and the various local wildlife, the deer and all that are all running around prepping for the winter. So there's a great deal of animal activity. The jays are hiding things. I assume the squirrels are doing the same, although I haven't seen them doing that. So all around us, we live on a fairly large piece of hillside woodland. All around us, the critters are busily preparing for the winter, and so are we, at least in the sense that we're actually starting to have those hideous conversations about things like, so when do we start Christmas shopping and all those other kinds of things. And I don't mean to sound like a Grinch. And one of the great things, by the way, for those of you who are younger than me and have not experienced this yet, one of the great things about having kids is having kids revivifies the holidays. There was a stretch of years there where my brothers and I, because I have two younger brothers, my brothers and I were all grown up, all kind of settled and married or, in stable relationships, but adults. And our parents, thank God, goodness, are still with us. And but this was 20 something years ago, so they were definitely with us then. But everybody in the family was all grown ups, so the holidays were these sort of perfunctory. Yeah, I mean they were good because we love our relatives. I love my brothers, I love their spouses, I love my parents. So we had perfectly nice family holidays, but they were just that. There was not a heck of a lot of difference between Thanksgiving and Christmas or anything like that. And Halloween was a complete wash. I've been living in the hills now since 1999, continuously. And as a result, we live in a place that trick or treaters don't come. So, Halloween in particular, there was nothing. It didn't exist as a holiday. Then you have kids, and all of a sudden, it's like one of those little trick gimmick things where you throw a little pellet into water and it turns into a flower. It absorbs all the liquid and expands. And that's kind of how it was with holidays. The holidays were gone until we all started having kids. Me and Deb first, with our son, but soon after, the others had followed along within 5 or 6 years and started to have kids of their own. And all of a sudden, it's like Christmas is Christmas again. And I'm not talking in a religious sense here because obviously as I've said before, I was not raised in a particularly religious family, but we celebrate holidays, and we oftentimes, if forced or asked, we will tell you what the meaning is behind the holiday for us. It's not like we don't have any relationship with the holidays and our shared humanity, but we don't have a specific religious thing that would keep us doing this stuff. So instead, the holidays are pretty much occasions to celebrate whatever the situation is, but also to do things with family. And having kids just brings everything back. And all of a sudden, Christmas starts months early. And I'm not just talking about the hideous, pervasive Christmas music. I'm talking about kids getting excited about things, kids wanting to know, what's going to happen? Are we going to do this? Are we going to go to this place, like we do every year? When are we getting our tree? Blah, 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 all this kind of stuff. Halloween, oh my God, all of a sudden Halloween is a big deal. You're not just having to have a trick-or-treating costume, but of course that is a must. But you got to have a costume to wear to school, and oftentimes you don't want it to be the same costume as the one you're wearing for trick-or-treating, because one is to wear in front of your friends and the other is to be scary at night or something. I mean, it's very it's very complicated, and you have to start planning all these things and all the holidays. Big deal suddenly. And so anyway, so we're now into the second trough where our kids are all now in there. Our youngest is 21. So we are now into the second trough of, like holidays are holidays. Not a huge deal anymore. Our daughter actually, who's the youngest, actually slept in Christmas morning until like 10 o'clock, which she's usually, 6 o'clock in the morning. She was always at our door going, get up, it's time. Gotta open presents, come on, and she actually slept in this year for the first time at age 20, I guess she was then. So that was, just her body finally changed and said, you don't have to be up at dawn anymore to see what Santa brought you. So things are changing, and I love the holidays, but I'll tell you, I do not like this log jam of holidays at the end of the year. So I'm trying to be sensible this year and start at a decent hour, decent time of the year to actually start doing presents. And Deb and I have started talking about them in a sort of a desultory way, like, well, yeah, so and so said they want such and such. Yeah, well, I suppose we could, we're kind of forcing ourselves to deal with it. But anyway, so that's kind of where we are, where the season has changed. We've smelled autumn on the wind. It's Ray Bradbury time. Things are changing. The winter is coming in, even though this is California and the winter is not much of a winter by most people's standards. But anyway, and of course, this year we're praying for rain. I mean, we're literally praying for rain. We're just so desperate for some water here in the West. But we're also starting to think about the holiday season, not not with unmixed feelings, I have to say, because again, especially when you're in the middle of a deadline, as I often seem to be, it's just so much distraction and so much stuff that has to be done. So anyway, not to complain. There will be many lovely things, and I do still have a deep fondness for the holidays. And the last thing I do here's all before I get on with my reading and well, and saying hello to people. My one holiday tradition that I have hung on to ever since I was a kid is because I even when I was a kid I was one of the last to go to bed, and but it really took over when I became a young adult. Which is that after everything is finished on Christmas Eve and everybody else has gone to bed, I always sit up, sometimes with a glass of something, but mostly just sit up by myself with all the lights out, but the Christmas tree, and just kind of dig the atmosphere. Just because that's where I can touch something of what the holiday means to me. That human thing of, okay, we know that spring is probably going to come after the winter is over. We know that the days will probably get longer after they've been getting short, and they're very short right now. But there's a part of us that's not 100% certain ever that this won't be the year that, the gods or whoever get upset with us and refuse to let spring come, refuse to let the sun come back, all the things that primitive humans worried about. So, whatever your religious take on the holidays, and specifically Christmas, I'm talking about right now, we all have that connection back to our primordial selves. And that's what I celebrate every year, is when I can be by myself for just a little while with everybody safely in bed. And I can sit there with the Christmas tree lights on by myself in the dark, sometimes listening to some particular Christmas carols that I really like, and just kind of be at one with this human tradition of the things that we have done for thousands of years, waiting to see if the sun actually comes back. So anyway, so that's what we're getting ready for here. We've felt the change in the wind, we've smelled autumn, and as a result, we are going to start thinking about, the changing of the year too. Oi, boy, it goes fast. Anyway, let me check in and say hello to everybody who is here. Holger, good to see you. So Holger is running off to go do some other things, but that is fine. I'm glad you came in. I have no idea what that's about there at the end. Oh, and there's my sister-in-law, Lisa. Hello, Lisa, sweetie. Good to see you. I hope you're still there. If not, I hope you perceive my hello and me sending love through the ether to England. So, Kristen, hello to you. And Carlo, checking in from Germany. A pleasure. Christine, as always, lovely to see you. Dirk, hello and good morning. There's my mother-in-law, Hazel. Good morning, Hazel. Yes, your daughter is very busy with quilts and blankets, and crocheting is what she's deep in at the moment. But otherwise, she's doing well. Otherwise, in the sense of, that's keeping her very busy and is occasionally a source of mild frustration. But anyway, love and kisses to all of you folks over there in the Midlands. We miss you. And Carol, good morning to you. Pierre, good morning, sir. Nice to see you. Petra, hello. Christine already checked in, so nice to see you too. Mark, good morning from rainy Yorkshire. I don't think you even have to say rainy Yorkshire. Anybody who's ever spent any time in Yorkshire is pretty much willing to believe it's probably rainy. As a matter of fact, I think we're shocked when we find out that, as I also know, sometimes it can be just lovely in Yorkshire. But this time of the year, my sympathies, I know it is probably a bit gray and damp. Jeremy, hello. Good to see you too. Nice to have you aboard. Emily, well, there's I can't even keep track of it. My niece's daughter. So, good to see you too. What a pleasure. Cindy, hello. Running off to play D&D. Yeah, that's our kids have been doing all night. Jessica, hello. Snuggle in your warm bed and ready to listen. That sounds like a good plan to me. Lisa, my sister-in-law, says rainy, horrible autumnal weather in the UK. Well, excellent use of the word autumnal, but I'm sorry to hear it. Andre, great to hear from you and good to see you. Jeremy's other brother says, Only Tad could make a description of California weather sound like something out of a Winnie the Pooh book. Well, I'm going to take that as a compliment. I have no idea what that means, but I'm going to take it as a compliment. And I'm sure Jonathan would want me to, just because he's a polite and kind person. Some characters still no parting and baffing for the cast of Into the Narrow. Some characters need a serious break. No, I'm still working. Still working. Ronnie, you don't have to apologize. Good to see you. Kristen, no, the Earth will not stop turning. I promise you. I promise it will not. The Earth will continue turning. Yes, and Andre, I totally am with you on that one. Although my thing is Halloween. I love to be out at Halloween at the end of the night because when I was a kid, especially as an older kid, to be one of the last people still out trick or treating was really also a kind of magical experience, especially because by that point, you were usually out in a part of town that you didn't know very well. And of course, it looks much different at dark. It's much easier to kind of feel like, wow, this is a completely unknown place that I am now exploring. Anyway, that was very cool for me too on Halloween. But yes, I love Christmas walks and seeing the lights in the houses and everything. And Anthony, hello. Good to see you too. So welcome all of you. Lovely to have you. I have now faffed, and there's a good British expression. I worked really hard when I lived in England for a few years not to pick up any accent because I'm one of those people who will pick up accents, not on purpose, but just because I'm kind of, I don't know, maybe it's because I want to fit in and have people like me, but also because I'm fascinated by the difference in dialects and accents and things like that. And because I used to be an actor, very just, local amateur dramatics. But I've always loved accents. So I had to work really hard in England because I didn't want to be some other jerk who'd moved to England and came back with a phony accent. So I did. I managed to resist almost entirely. And anything you hear in my speech that sounds non-Californian, I'm pretty sure was already there because I've always been a weird, pretentious bugger. But I worked really hard not to pick up an accent, so I didn't. But what I did pick up were all these expressions that I still use. And some of them I'd picked up in English novels long before I moved to England, but I would have never used them. But once I'd been in England, I was saying things like, oh yeah, I was dead chuffed about that. I noticed not saying it with an English accent, which made it even weirder to my American friends. Or I would say, oh, you English folk, you better put your fingers in your ears here. I'd be playing basketball and I'd miss a layup. I go, oh, bloody buggering bollocks. And my American friends would just stare at me like I'd started speaking in tongues or something. So I picked up all these expressions, all these English expressions. And of course, now Deborah has lived in the United States now for decades. And as a result, we can't remember anymore a lot of times which expression is American and which expression is English. And would not be a problem except when you're a writer and you're trying to write, say, for instance, a book like this, right, where the people in it are young teenagers, American teenagers who've never been out of California. So it's actually fairly important to know if an expression is an American expression or an English expression. But Deborah and I will still repeatedly say to each other, hang on a second, is that English or is that American? And it's gone so far in some ways that on some things we've completely flip-flopped. For instance, Deborah now, perhaps because she's the gardener, I don't know. Deborah now says herbs, Herbs, herbs. That is the American pronunciation. I say herbs. Herbs, Herbs, is the British pronunciation. So somewhere along the line, we just completely flip-flopped. And she now says it the American way, and I now say it the English way. And we have no idea when that happened or why that happened. So it's odd. But then again, we're odd people. I've told you that my family model is the Addams family. And Deborah has very wholeheartedly glommed onto that and completely agrees. And she is more than a bit Morticia-like. And I speak Spanish, so I'm pretty Gomez. Pretty Gomez in my own right. Anyway, okay, so we were reading Dragons of Ordinary Farm. And we were in which chapter was it? Chapter 12. And chapter 12 was called Farm Work. There it is. Farm Work. And that is a picture of a baby griffin, just in case you weren't certain. I'm just showing you the pictures because this edition is hard to find now, and I think the author did some really sweet pictures for it, so I think it'd be a waste for people not to see them. Anyway, so Tyler is taking Lucinda to the library, which is way out in the sort of the back of beyond on the property. But it's a beautiful library full of amazing old books and also apparently a haunted washstand mirror. And Tyler, along with Zaza, the flying monkey, and remember, we still don't know the origin of any of these strange creatures, dragons, unicorns, griffins, flying monkeys. He's taking Lucinda to see this. So I'm going to just drop back a paragraph or so, and we're going to go on from there. Lucinda was impressed by the library, all right. Not so much by the picture of Uncle Octavio, who she thought looked very full of himself, but by the sheer number of books. "This is more than we have in our whole school library," she said. "More than in our whole city library." "Yeah, but most of them are, I don't know, crazy science and math books and stuff you wouldn't like. Not a single copy of Mall Chicks Go to Malibu." "You're being a craphead again, Tyler. I haven't read those books since I was in 4th grade. When you were reading Axel the Tow Truck Fixes a Flat." He laughed in spite of himself. How had she remembered that? He had really liked those stories. Axel had a best friend who was a girl motorcycle, and all the characters were cars and trucks. Put an asterisk on that, by the way. I have a little story to tell you at some point, either at the end of the reading tonight or some other time, about Axel the tow truck. "Come on," he said, and switched on his flashlight. This time he wasn't going to give away their presence in the library by turning on the lights. "I'll show you the haunted room." The room didn't look quite as creepy as it did before, but Lucinda didn't exactly look like she wanted to move in either. "Why did you say haunted?" she asked in a whisper. He took her to the mirror at the washstand and swept the flashlight over it. At first it looked like nothing more than an ordinary mirror, reflecting Tyler and his light, Lucinda, and the room. After a while, though, it still looked like that. "I don't get it," his sister said. "It was different last time." Tyler was embarrassed. He could hear the upset in his own voice and didn't like it, too much like a little kid. I could see me, but I was different. Different clothes and stuff. It wasn't the same me. And the light in the room was different too, like a different time of day. I'm not lying, Lucinda." "I believe you," she said, surprising him. "We've seen unicorns and a dragon, so why couldn't there be a haunted mirror?" Tyler let out a breath. He hadn't expected to be believed. Suddenly, he felt so much lighter he almost thought he could float up into the air like Zaza. "Good. Anyway, it's also where I found this piece of paper on the floor here. We should look through the drawers." Most of the washstand drawers were empty, but in the bottom right drawer they found an old-fashioned pen, the kind you dipped into a bottle of ink. Part of the length had been chewed off by something, and the bottom of the drawer was broken so that they could see down to the darkness under the dresser. Tyler was just pushing it closed again when Lucinda grabbed his arm and pointed. A shred of yellowed paper was caught in the jagged edge of the drawer's broken bottom. Tyler's heart began to beat more quickly. It was only a tatter, the size of a fingernail clipping, but when he pulled it out and held it up next to the page with the writing, the paper was the exact same color. They tried to move the washstand away from the wall, but it was either much heavier than it looked or had been bolted to the wall, perhaps to keep the heavy mirror on top from tipping the whole thing over. Tyler got down on his hands and knees and began probing the hole at the bottom of the drawer with the ruined pen. Something was still in there. He poked at it until sweat ran down into his eyes and dripped onto the dusty floor. then finally had the idea of poking it out toward the front where he could get a grip on it and gently ease the whole thing out. Lucinda leaned in as he held it up. It was a leather-bound notebook, full of pages just like the one he'd found on his bed. The whole thing had been badly chewed by mice or some other scavengers, so that many of the pages were little more than tangled curls of paper. Still, a quick riffle through the pages showed lots of writing. The mice hadn't ruined it all. "Look at the cover," he said. The chipped remnants of what had once been gold paint read, and then it's I don't know if you can read that. Whoops. It basically says property of Octavio M. Tinker, Esquire, but it's been scratched and scraped up. He felt a ripple of excitement so strong he shivered. "It's really his, and we've got it. But we can't tell anybody." Lucinda nodded, her eyes wide. Outside, Zaza was waiting, perched on top of great whatever Octavio's picture, peering down at them as though not quite trusting that whatever came out of the retiring room was going to be the same as whatever went in. Lucinda stared at the painting. "What's that thing in his hand?" she asked. "I've never seen one of those before. Is it some musical thing?" "I don't know." Tyler really looked at the golden thing for the first time. Besides the long trumpet-like tubes, it was made up of an overlapping series of jagged-edged circles and points, as if old Octavio had just taken out the workings of some large clock and screwed them together in random order. Then Tyler noticed that in his other hand, Octavio held a black velvet bag, and suddenly he realized that it was meant to hold the shiny device. Like the picture was about that thing as much as about him," he said quietly. But Lucinda heard him and nodded as if she had been thinking the same thought. They were halfway back to the house when Zaza suddenly leaped off Tyler's shoulder and flapped into the air, making strange, shrill noises more like a bird than a monkey, like the sound that jays made at home when something got too close to their nests. The big black squirrel again, or just another like it, crouched silently on the branch of a tree. Zaza darted upward and flew at the squirrel, but it didn't flinch, nor did the pale yellow eyes even blink. There was definitely something wrong about the creature, but except for its size and eye color, Tyler couldn't have said what. It watched calmly, unmoving, as Zaza flew at it, chittering loudly, once, twice, 3 times. Then the winged monkey gave up and flitted away between the trees. Tyler and Lucinda began walking toward the house once more. "What was that?" His sister's voice was a harsh whisper. Sorry, the stupid thing has just done a... There we go. "What was that?" His sister's voice was a harsh whisper. "A squirrel," he said, trying to keep his voice calm. After all, only a baby would be afraid of a squirrel. "Then why does it have eyes like a goat?" she demanded. "Yellow with that little sideways slot. Squirrels don't have eyes like that." "Tyler Jenkins!" someone shouted. He pulled up, looking around. "Who's that?" "It's Mrs. Needle." "Maybe she needs you for something." "She's calling you, Tyler." She was right, of course, but he wished she wasn't. "Shoot," he said. "Now what?" "Here, you take the book. Go, hide it in your room." "What are you talking about? It's too big to go in my pocket, Lucinda, and I don't want her to know we found it." She looked at him, ready to argue. Then Mrs. Needle called again from somewhere just ahead. For someone so soft-spoken, the woman could sure put some edge in her voice. Lucinda abruptly grabbed the book, hid it inside her pants, and then doubled back around the corner of the building. She vanished just as Mrs. Needle appeared from the other direction, dressed in black as usual, a look of irritation on her pale face. Tyler Jenkins, I'm very disappointed in you, she said. You should know better than to go exploring old buildings without permission. Some of them are dangerous. He did his best to look calm and innocent. What do you mean? The library, Tyler. It hasn't been maintained for years. Mrs. Needle took his wrist in her cold fingers and began to lead him back toward the house. You should not be in there by yourself. Something could fall on you. You could be badly hurt. She didn't sound like she'd regret it very much. Tyler let himself be marched across a patch of open ground, relieved that at least his sister had gotten away with the book. But how had Mrs. Needle known they were in the library? He and Lucinda hadn't turned on any lights. He looked up. The black squirrel was perched on the edge of the roof, squat as a loaf of burned bread. Only the pale eyes had color, the unblinking stare that Lucinda had described so well. Eyes like a goat. And now we move along to Chapter 14. The Mother of All Mothers. From her window, Lucinda saw Tyler walking past below on his way to the hen house with a bucket of soapy water, a brush, and an expression of extreme annoyance. Mrs. Needle had obviously put him to work, and it didn't look like he would be back any time soon. She felt that she ought to lock the door and start looking through the old mouse-chewed notebook they'd found, but it was too hot and stuffy. Just the thought of it made her feel sleepy. She knew Tyler would be furious with her if she didn't at least hide the notebook, though, so she lifted her mattress and slid it in on top of the lumpy box spring and went downstairs. She peered into the kitchen. Sarah and Pima were cleaning the counters. "Come in," the cook said when she saw Lucinda. "Have some lemonade." Sarah took a pitcher out of the refrigerator while Lucinda got herself a glass. "I hear you're going to ein fire," she said as Lucinda drank. What's that? A fire? Eine Feier. A celebration. Tomorrow. You have invited me. It is a 4th of July celebration at the other farm with the children. Which sounded okay if it was the kids they'd met in the diner, the Carrillos. At least they were more or less the same age as Tyler and her. Lucinda rinsed out her glass and put the lemonade back, then wandered out to the front of the house. The porch was empty, the gravel-covered drive spreading in front of her. What she really wanted to do was go see some animals. The unicorns, maybe, although they frightened her more than a little. She couldn't forget that horn flashing past her face like the breathless swish of a sword blade. And they were so wild. She could imagine them leaping over any fence they wanted to, no matter how high, as free and uncaged as clouds. Lucinda ambled over to the hen house. Tyler was in a foul mood. "Did you hide the thing?" He opened his hands like he was playing charades. "Book." She rolled her eyes. "Of course." She looked at him for a moment, pushing soapy water back and forth across the disgusting floor of the hen house. The smell of the place was revolting. To her astonishment, though, she heard herself ask, "Do you want some help?" He stopped scrubbing long enough to stare, as if some alien being had taken his sister's place. "Nah, I can't. I have to do it myself. The Wicked Witch told me. She's mad at me for exploring." He smiled. "But thanks." She was on her way back from the hen house when she saw Colin Needle in the distance, crouching by the door of the sick barn, examining the door latch. "Hello, Colin," she said. He jumped up like he'd been burned. "Oh, hello, Lucinda. Nice to see you." He waved his hands at nothing, as far as she could tell. "Can't stop to chat just now. Loads to do. Sorry." He hurried past her back toward the house, his stiff strides much more rapid than usual, like a man on stilts hurrying to find a bathroom. Lucinda reached out. The door to the sick barn was open. She wondered why he'd been examining it so carefully. She cautiously stuck her head in. "Hello?" When she heard no answer, she stepped inside. At first she thought there was no one else in the great high-ceilinged barn except her and the vast, unmoving bulk of the dragon, stretched in its long pen like a ship docked for repairs. The idea of being alone with such a monster was enough to make her back toward the door. "Miss?" The farmhand Haneb was coming toward her from the other end of the barn, bulky from the neck down, in a baggy gray safety suit. His lanky black hair hung in his face, and he held his head at an odd angle to hide his scars. "Do you come for the boy Colin, miss?" he asked her. "He's gone. Or for the Master Walkwell, or the Master Ragnar. They are both gone also to fetch more medicine." "Medicine?" She let the door fall shut behind her. As it banged closed, a deep rumble came up from the pen in response, a sound that made Lucinda's insides vibrate beneath her ribs. "Is she still sick? I thought she was all right." "Meseret?" He shook his head sadly, still carefully keeping the scarred side away from her. "We do not know. Perhaps it is just the sadness of her egg, that it dies." He shrugged, struggling to find words. "To learn more, next week we give her, he frowned, "sleeping medicine. Then we take away egg, so Mr. Walkwell and Mr. Gideon can study it." It was by far the most she had ever heard Haneb say. Lucinda stared at the pen, trying to look braver than she felt. Just the size of the dragon, its back corrugated with scales like an alligator's, but wide as a bus, made it hard for Lucinda to get her breath. Being this near to something so big and alive was terrifying beyond explanation. If Meseret made a sudden movement, Lucinda knew she would turn and run out of the barn, no matter how embarrassed she would be about it later. The dragon lay with her egg between her forelegs, like an exhausted puppy with a favorite toy. The rest of her immense body was stretched belly down to the far end of the pen, her great hind legs all but invisible under the swell of her pale, shiny belly. The egg was startlingly small, no bigger around at its base than a basketball, although its narrow oblong shape made it almost twice that big. It was bizarre to think of something as big as something so big as Meseret could start out smaller than a sleeping bag. Then, as Lucinda saw the mother dragon's sagging yellowed eye, she remembered again that this egg wouldn't be growing up to be anything. "Poor thing," she said, almost to herself, stepping closer. Haneb carefully moved to Lucinda's left side as they stood at the railing. "She seems so exhausted, like she's just given up." She looked at Meseret's eye, mostly closed, but still fascinating, inescapable. "Is everyone sure the egg isn't alive?" "Yes," said Haneb, then hesitated. "If you want, I show you Mr. Gideon's magic, same I showed Master Colin." When she nodded, he pulled a fireproof hood with a plastic face shield over his head, then shyly took Lucinda's arm with his thickly gloved hand and led her along the edge of the dragon pen to an old metal desk and a laptop computer. The dragon didn't move, but her huge half-lidded eyes shifted slightly to watch Lucinda. Yes, to watch her, not Haneb, she felt oddly sure. Was it just because she was unfamiliar? Lucinda stood on her tiptoes and leaned over the rail. The fire-colored eye widened, just a little, but it was enough for Lucinda to feel quite boneless in her legs. She let herself back down again, slowly. Meseret's head was the size of a small sports car, a great wedge of bone and scale and teeth, with back-swept fins growing from just behind the orbits around her eyes. Her neck was long and muscular, but quickly spread out into the shoulders and the huge folded membranes of her wings, which grew in a bat-like flare, as far as Lucinda could tell. It was hard to make out many details with the dragon lying down, between the uppermost toes of her forelegs and the top of her hips. The bottom two toes on each side, scarcely thicker than Lucinda's arms, but long as tree branches, provided the struts on which the wing skins stretched, like paper over the balsa wood bones of a kite. For a moment Lucinda longed to touch the near wing. It seemed so delicate, a translucent banner of flesh next to the castle of craggy hide. Haneb clumped past her in his strange suit. With his hood on, he looked like a robot out of an ancient science fiction movie. He held some kind of plastic wand in one hand, attached by a curly cord to a plastic box about the size and shape of a briefcase. He looked so strange and moved so slowly, she almost expected him to vault over the walls of the pen like an astronaut in reduced gravity, but instead he fumbled open the gate with his free hand and trudged inside. Meseret rumbled again. Lucinda felt the sound from the soles of her feet upward, but when it finished, a curious vibration remained in her skull, as though her brain was still bouncing from the dragon's low growl. She realized after a few moments that the hair on her neck and arms was standing up, her skin tingling. She couldn't believe how small Haneb was compared to the bulk of the dragon. Meseret had raised her head a little, and the top of his hood barely reached the bottom of her rolling eye. "Oh, be careful," she said, but she doubted he could hear her. Haneb knelt beside the egg. The dragon's rumble went up in pitch, but Haneb did not slow or stop. He extended the wand toward the egg until it was only a few inches away. Sorry, I lost it. He extended the wand toward the egg until it was only a few inches away, then moved it even more slowly forward until it touched the waxy shell. Lucinda suddenly realized what he was doing. It was one of those ultrasound things like they used on pregnant women, and turned toward the desk and the computer screen. The black and white image was moving and changing, a murky, confusing mess that only gradually resolved itself into something like a huge wad of chewed gum wrapped in cellophane. The baby with its wings folded around it, she guessed. The picture was completely still. When Haneb stopped moving the wand, there was no other movement. The thing in the egg might have been stone. "Oh," she said, and suddenly there were tears in her eyes. "How terrible! A tiny baby dragon dead in its egg that way, never to see the light or feel the air." "Oh no," she said. "A poor little thing." Meseret's vast eye turned to Lucinda again, a red gold ball with a thin black slit that went all the way from the top to the bottom. The buzzing in Lucinda's head intensified, as though whatever was stuck in there had just discovered there was no way out and was beginning to get angry. Lucinda tried to look away, but the eye seemed to glow in the dark room so that even the great bulk of the dragon itself began to fade into shadow, and the glowing golden orb was all she could see, burning like a coal, like a tiny sun. Something pushed at her thoughts again, a feeling of anger and despair, so powerful and so alien that it seemed like an electrical storm inside her. Lucinda could almost feel lightning crackling and sputtering in her skull. Everything went swimmy behind her eyes, red, black, whirling and whirling. Why was the ceiling suddenly sideways? Why was she standing pressed against a wall, held by some kind of flesh magnetism? Why was Haneb floating on his side before her, his face full of alarm? Miss, You okay? Have you hurt? She groaned and closed her eyes. She couldn't push herself off the wall, but with her eyes closed, it felt less like a wall and more like the ground. She opened her eyes again. Now it made sense. She was lying on her back. Haneb was bending over her. What happened? You fell. Have you ill, miss? Oh, God, do I have what the dragon has? Am I going to die? Haneb actually smiled. The flash of white extending to both sides of his ruined face and creasing the scarred side in a surprising way allowed her for the first time to see him without seeing his wounds first. No, miss, you're not going to die. Not from dragon illness. People don't get it. I think just it is very hot for you today. Before Lucinda could reply, Meseret let out another deep grumbling noise. For some reason, this one seemed less despairing, more like a warning. Oh, Lucinda said, staring at the dragon. Look! Meseret was up, swaying unevenly, as if she had not stood in a while, but still up on her stout legs. The crest of her back, which had only stretched a yard or two above Lucinda's head when the beast was lying down, now arched high above like a suspension bridge. Meseret lifted her head, her huge nostrils sucking air. The dragon bumped hard against the bars of the pen, making them rattle and creak, then opened her mouth and growled. Lucinda stumbled back with her hands over her ears, doing her best not to scream. It's just like King Kong, she thought, terrified. She's trying to get out. Haneb clutched her arm. She doesn't get out. She is tied and the pen keeps her wings close. And she's not angry at us. He tugged Lucinda toward the door. So why are we running away? We are not running from her. Haneb's smile was long gone, but his teeth were still showing like the snarl of a frightened dog. Alamu comes. Her mate. Meseret threw back her head and belched out an immense rolling cloud of flame and black smoke that rippled through the metal struts on the ceiling. Even from 2 or 3 dozen yards away, Lucinda could feel the heat like an oven door suddenly swung open. But why is she angry? Lucinda squealed. It was true. She could feel the dragon's fury coiling like a hot wire in her thoughts. Because he will take the egg if he can, said Haneb, fumbling at the door. He will eat it. Hurry now. But he can't get in, can he? Look up. He pointed toward the ceiling with his padded glove. There were 2 huge skylight windows among the struts. Alamu is smaller than her. If he gets onto the roof, he will come through easy. Lucinda helped Haneb wrestle open the heavy door. It felt like a nightmare, one of those dreams where you run but can't escape. We must quickly let Mr. Gideon know, Haneb said as they stumbled outside. He yanked off his hood. His black hair was damp and his scarred face shiny with sweat. The 2 of them began to run away from the sick barn, headed back toward the main house. The air outside the barn had a strange smell, acidic and prickly. Well, what can Gideon? She began, then fell silent as a nightmarish shape came around the nearest corner of the house. Alamu was not even half Meseret's size, but terrifyingly faster in his movements than the female dragon. He was covered with copper and black scales that gleamed like a rattlesnake's back in the clear morning light, and as he reared up to more than twice Lucinda's height, the dragon flashed curving claws like bunches of ivory bananas. He turned his wedge-shaped head sideways, examining them, then dropped back down suddenly and stretched his head forward, squinting in exactly their direction. Haneb jerked Lucinda to a halt. Quiet, he hissed. And do not move. She couldn't have moved at that moment if she'd wanted to. The dragon's wings unfurled, slow and beautiful, like a butterfly emerging from a cocoon. Then his thin body suddenly whipping into the air, the monster came flying straight at them. He was on them before they could even duck. For a moment, Lucinda could hear nothing but her breathing and the rush of her blood. Then something cracked past them like a snapped towel, a towel big as a missile. Alamu flew over their heads, his sand-colored wings rippling along their edges, then folded those wings so swiftly that he plummeted to the ground and landed with a thump that Lucinda felt in her bones. Now that he was between them and the greater safety of the barn, Alamu began to walk toward them, his head held low. Haneb, holding Lucinda's hand in a painful grip, shoved her behind him and said, "Back! Go back into the canning shed." "What?" She looked over her shoulder and saw a small wooden shed a dozen yards away, built next to one of the farm's many wells. The door was off. She couldn't imagine it keeping the dragon off her for more than a few seconds. "Go!" he cried. "Please, miss, but go slow." And then he stepped forward and away from her, clapping his gloved hands with a muffled thump and calling out, "Ha-ha! Ha-ha! Ha-ha!" to the dragon over and over. Little shudders ran down the lengths of its neck. Now Alamu was watching only Haneb, a snake watching a hopelessly trapped mouse. Lucinda backed into the doorway of the shed, but couldn't bear to step inside where she wouldn't be able to see what was happening. Haneb had stopped again and was standing utterly still as the dragon stalked toward him on its hind legs, head extended on a line with Haneb's own. As Alamu breathed in and out, little flames danced around his nostrils. The creature paused and sniffed delicately at the air all around the unmoving Haneb, who had dropped his hood somewhere in the excitement. Lucinda was terrified the monster would engulf the small man's poor disfigured face in fire. Was this what had happened to him before? Were those dragon scars? Alamu's long head moved closer on the supple neck, a yard of bone and teeth and muscle, the air in front of the nostrils rippling in the heat. The copper and black scales caught the light, glittering. The mouth open, showing the curving fangs and a snaky black tongue. From somewhere far away came a deep, flat ringing. A bell, but not quite like anything Lucinda had ever heard. The dragon stopped, alert and listening. A moment later it snorted and turned away, then began to run across the open space beside the sick barn, each step as heavy as the pounding of a sledgehammer, until suddenly it leaped into the air and sailed away from them again, tail lashing, a serpent wriggling across the sky. Lucinda heard herself breathe out. Haneb had dropped down to sit on the ground and was staring at his hands as though he was astounded to discover he owned a pair. Lucinda ran from the shed, shading her eyes as she looked up. Alamu flew fast, but the sky was big and clear. As he headed away over the house toward the reptile barn and the far pastures, she had a last view of the dragon, sunlight glowing through his translucent wings. "Wow," she breathed, then suddenly began to cry. And rather than start a new chapter with 5 minutes or less left, I'm going to stop there. But I will tell you why the axle to tow truck. The talking about the books that Tyler liked when he was a kid and why those are significant. And then tomorrow, we will begin again with chapter 15, which has the cryptic title of Beating the Big Crab. And you'll find out then what that's about. what I wanted to mention is quite frequently in my books, not quite frequently, but from time to time in my books, I don't tend to put real people in my books. Very seldom. I think I've done that twice, except for, no, there was another time where some people won a charity contest and they wound up being killed in a particularly grisly way in the Otherland books. But other than that, there's only been two times that I've used actual human beings in my books. And I'll tell you about those, both of them, some other time. But what I do often do is I will tuck other little small personal bits of humor or whatever into my work, mostly to amuse myself, really, occasionally to amuse other people who happen to be in on things. One very good example of that, speaking of the Otherland books, is the company owned by the Bill Gates-like character Robert Wells, which is called Telemorphics, which is part of the sort of grand conspiracy in the Otherland books. And I won't tell you more than that if you haven't read them. You should. So Telemorphics, the name of that, was actually the name of a company that my friend Andy Harris and I started to do interactive television. Now, this was back in the 1980s when such things were really kind of just a dream, but we did some very early experimentation and actually did a TV show, an interactive TV show for a while called 21st Century Vaudeville. And that's a whole other story, which I'll tell you sometimes as well. But so that's an example of how like little bits and pieces of things that were of interest to me sneak into my work. Occasionally I will snatch a phrase from something that I've always really liked, like the work of Vivian Stanshall, who was one of the two main guys in the Bonzo Dog Band, a very funny, satirical British comedy group that had some affiliation with the Monty Python people, among other things. And Vivian Stanshall did one of the greatest works of comedy ever created, as far as I'm concerned, which is called Sir Henry at Rawlinson End. A hilarious spoken word thing about this bizarre English quasi-noble family, this decaying noble family and their strange behavior. And I will occasionally slip in a little quote from Sir Henry at Rawlinson End into some of my books, which nobody who doesn't know Sir Henry would ever recognize, and even so might miss it. For instance, there was a phrase about somebody feeling something that was like handling raw sausages at a children's Halloween party or something like that, like being blindfolded and handling raw sausages at a children's Halloween party. And so I stuffed something in one of my books about somebody's fingers feeling strange and like raw sausages. So I will use little bits and pieces like this of things that amuse me or of personal meaning to me. Now, in Dragons of Ordinary Farm, there are probably a few of them, but we just had one, and that is the reference to Axel, the tow truck. Now, in the book, Axel the Tow Truck is mentioned as a real-world book that Tyler liked when he was a kid about a tow truck named Axel, A-X-E-L. But the pun is obvious, who had a best friend who was a motorcycle, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the actual story behind the fact, Telemorphics was this company that my friend Andy and I invested years of time and a lot of our money into that was ultimately brought down by one of our employees, but that's a long story. But anyway, it never turned into anything. We have some bitterness about that because we were doing some really interesting things at the time. And as a result, I said, well, that's my name. I invented Telemorphic as a name for doing things remotely because it literally means to do things over distance, to dream over distance, or to make shapes over distance. So I like Telemorphic as an early description of multimedia, of interactive multimedia. So I saved Telemorphics and I made it the name of the one of the evil corporations in the Otherland books. Similarly, Axel was actually an idea for a children's book. Now, about the time we were writing The Dragons of Ordinary Farm, and just before it, Deborah and I were raising very, very young kids. Our children then were quite young because this was back in the late 90s, early 2000s when we wrote this. And one of the things we wrote was a proposal for a book about a tow truck named Axel, a children's book, and all of his friends were cars or vehicles. And we also wrote some other real, I think, really quite good proposals for children's books, including one called My Baby Brother is an Alien, which was really about the problem of having a baby brother in general and how strange it is to have this newcomer in the house. But we basically made the story as though the baby was literally an alien and like pooped glowing metal and stuff like that. And it's about how he comes to really enjoy his baby brother and the cool things about having a baby brother. So, anyway, so we sent these off. At this point, obviously, I had been 15 years or more as a professional writer and had best-selling books and things like that. And the response we got from children's book publishers was really kind of astonishing. They're basically people going like, well, I mean, they didn't say it, but the implication was kind of like, you can't just walk into our field and assume that you don't know anything about children's books. And one of the letters that we got back was like how kids are not going to go for anthropomorphic cars and trucks. This obviously was before Cars or whatever that helicopter kids TV show was, or any variety of other things. But this person, this publisher, this children's book publisher said very authoritatively, kind of like, you science fiction people think you can just walk into our field, and said, anthropomorphic cars and trucks, that's not going to work. Kids are not going to go for that, which was just such utter nonsense. Anyway, so as with telomorphic, something very good and very fun that I wanted to hang on to, and I saved it in the name of the book. We felt the same way about Axel the tow truck, which we thought could have been a really cool set of stories for kids. And I think would have worked really well, but we just could not get past the wall of sort of NIMBYism, the kind of stay out of our turf that we got from a lot of children's book publishers at the time. We couldn't sell a single thing. Nobody wanted to talk to us, basically. It was irritating, but it was also funny that people would be that defensive, and that already being a well-known writer in my field was, if anything, seemed like it was a handicap rather than an aid of any kind to getting noticed. Anyway, so that's the story. That's why Axel the tow truck is in the Dragons of Ordinary Farm. It was the book about the little tow truck that we never got to write. And so at least in this way, Axel still lives. Anyway, so on behalf of Axel and all little tow trucks who were denied their personhood everywhere, I thank you all for joining me. Take good care of yourselves. I'll be back tomorrow night. It's a little late, so I'm going to rush through this. I'll be back tomorrow, well, today actually, at 7 p.m. Those of you who can't join me, I will see you next week. I wish you all the best. Take good care of yourselves and your loved ones, your friends and neighbors, and I will see you very soon. Thank you again for spending time with me. It's a real pleasure. Good night. Good morning.